Hello, I am Janos Di-Fanteria. Friday the 13th. For centuries, that date has carried a reputation for bad luck. But on Friday the 13th of October 1307, something very real happened. Across France and Europe, the officers of King Philip IV opened sealed orders. Before the day was over, hundreds of Knights Templar had been arrested, their property seized, and one of medieval Europe's most powerful organisations had begun its descent towards complete destruction. But what if some of them knew that it was coming? In this episode of Janos Di-Fanteria Reads, we return to Paris on the eve of the arrests. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, walks unknowingly towards captivity. Guillaume de Nogaret waits for his meticulously prepared trap to close. And beside him stands the fictional Elena de-Augustine, pursuing an objective far older than the Templars themselves. And high above Paris, Gerard de Villiers and Hugo de Besançon are in the temple, preparing to run. After the reading, we step behind the fiction to examine the extraordinary coordinated operation of 13th of October 1307, Philip IV's motives, the accusations levelled against the Templars, the fate of Jacques de Molay, and the enduring legend that the destruction of the order gave us the superstition of Friday the 13th. Sometimes history creates legends, and sometimes legends rewrite history. Welcome to Authors. The black velvet funeral mortcloth of the late Catherine de Valois, sister-in-law to King Philip IV of France and the Empress of Constantinople, was not ostentatious, nor was the scene one of regal splendour. It was a dour observance, the afternoon a cold one in Paris, a warning of the harsh winter to come. It was the 12th of October, 1307. In stark contrast to the lack of grandeur in the funeral cortege, the mourners were amongst the most powerful and dignified in France, all silent and resigned to the solemnity of the occasion. One alone amongst the courtiers and barons of France stood in austere juxtaposition, humbly resplendent in his white mantle and red cross. With an armed escort of similarly garbed and bearded knights, distinctive in an age when most men were clean-shaven, Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, was honoured and suitably flattered to be holding one of the cords of the black pall that covered the coffin. His manner was dignified, not aloof, but he wore a mask of serenity and total respect. Behind the entourage of Templar knights strode the forceful and prominent figure of Guillaume de Nogaret, the holder of the office of Keeper of the Seal, the king's most trusted and feared litigator. His awesome and comprehensive plan was complete. He waited nothing more than dawn on Friday, the 13th of October 1307, for his citation to ensnare the poor knights of Christ once and for all. The long and arduous composition of the 127 detailed and startling accusations against the Templars, coupled with the inflammatory arrest order, which he intended to serve in person at the gates of the temple the very next morning, had been completed by the middle of September, and so in complete secrecy at the remote monastery of Saint-Marie-Maubisson, near Pontoise, just 30 kilometres northwest of Paris. A few weeks later, the lawyer was fitted and rewarded with high office by his grateful king, to whom he presented his plan. He did so in an appropriate location, for it had been in that very abbey in Pontoise where Philip's grandfather, King Louis IX, later sanctified as Saint Louis, had vowed to God while suffering from a virulent illness that, if he survived, he would lead a crusade to the Holy Land. In Paris, de Nogaret smiled sardonically to himself as he watched the seeming arrogance of his prize captive, who had placed himself and his closest allies in the Templar leadership in France right in the middle of his trap. A bitter thing, a lamentable thing, a thing horrible to think of and terrible to hear, a detestable crime, an execrable evil deed, an abominable work, a detestable disgrace, a thing wholly inhuman, foreign to all humanity. Yes, thought de Nogaret, this was a fitting opening to his order for arrest. His consummate, all-encompassing plan, absolute surprise, and total control of the seneschal and baillie who would enforce the iron will of his king across the country, would ensure total victory. It seemed inconceivable that the 200-year hegemony the warrior monks had enjoyed across Europe and the Holy Land would come to such an end. Ignominious though it was, the 2,000 or so knights that were currently in France were, for the most part, completely unaware of the peril that awaited them. The lack of resistance at the temple in Paris and the easy acquiescence of so many would, coupled with some remarkable coincidences, mean that in early October 1307, not only were almost all the senior officials of the order in the capital, but they were, almost to a man, taken without even a modicum of hindrance. For the Grand Master and some of his officials, this seemed to border on complacency. So sure were they of the 2 centuries of prestige and military power they had enjoyed, as well as the protection they felt still existed from the papacy, and, to no lesser extent, the impregnability and strength of the temple itself in Paris. They had inaccurately deemed themselves invulnerable. However, some had been informed. They had been made aware of the writing on the wall and had put in place meticulous plans to escape. They intended to do so with as much of the wealth that had been procured since the early 12th century. De Nogaret's malicious musing was broken by a touch to his left hand. It was warm, gentle, slender, an elegant reminder of his mistress, Elena de-Augustine. But to de Nogaret, the man so consumed with his guile, this caress sent a chill to his very core. For he, the man who would be instrumental in the downfall and destruction of the most powerful of medieval orders, was absolutely terrified of the woman by his side. He was but the instrument, she the virtuoso. Born in Toulouse in 1260, de Nogaret's rise to prominence had been swift but not unexpected. Unknown to him, he had been manipulated as early as 1287 when, as the professor of jurisprudence at the School of Law in Montpellier, he had first come to Eleanor's attention. She was discreet, uncompromising, and deadly. The scheme had not been accidental, as she was conscious of gaining the absolute subservience of a man of power and prestige, one who could be easily controlled, directed, and steered into securing a position within the royal circle. Elena knew this only too well, as she had already attempted an elaborate seduction of Philippe the Hardy, the son of Saint Louis, for she was convinced he had intimate knowledge of the prize she sought with all her malignance and cunning. She had pursued the scent since the Romans sacked Jerusalem in 70 AD, and had followed close on the heels of the Visigoths, who, in turn, sacked Rome in 410. Her search was narrowing, and she was convinced that the high valley of the river Aude in southeastern France was the final resting place of that which she sought. Toulouse itself had been the Visigoth capital, and it was she, 300 years later, who had been instrumental in turning the violent attentions of the Frankish king Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne, to this very locality. Her persistence was unnerving, and again she returned to the region after 5 long centuries, persuading the pious Louis to depart for the Crusade in 1244. It was she who had been close to his son as he fortified the defences of the forts around Carcassonne and Toulouse. But so far, it had all been to no avail. Her target eluded her still, and for 2 exasperating centuries since the First Crusade, those damnable warrior monks had been guarding her quarry. She was wrong about this, but she would only discover it a very, very long time later. So, she had changed her tactics, and nurtured the ambitious yet gullible young lawyer, created openings and opportunities that even he could not fail to realize. She needed someone close to the king, someone who could influence and orchestrate the Templars' downfall. But she also needed someone from Toulouse, a powerful man with local and national authority. This would enable her to get closer to her treasure. He suited her purpose and would be discarded or destroyed if he failed her. There was no remorse, and he was a puppet, nothing more. De Nogaret had neither the wit nor the cunning to appreciate this, and his time was running out. It was late in the afternoon on Thursday, the 12th of October, 1307, and as the funeral cortege was making its way to the service on the right bank of the River Seine, 2 Templar knights were concluding their preparations. The great tower of the temple stronghold dominated the Paris skyline. It was an imposing edifice, a testament to the financial and military power of the now 200-year-old order. It stood in defiance, menacing and secure. The Templar preceptor of France, Gérard de Villiers, and his faithful old comrade and assistant, Sergeant Hugues de Besancon, were looking across the river west and into the far distance. 300 miles, my Hugo. We must make haste. Is all prepared? The grizzled warrior turned to his master. Almost. We should hear from one of my men soon. We have ensured we have respite at Massy Abbey. It's to the west of Orleans, and there we will meet Hugo de Chalon and others, I hope. That's good news. He is an old friend and loyal to the inner circle, replied de Villiers. Indeed he is, said the sergeant as he wiped his face with a huge leather handkerchief. From there, we wait de la Roche, who is already well on his way from Toulon with 7 brothers. Once rested, we can push on to La Rochelle. The plan is to embark from Le Gabou. I will have further details confirmed once we are all safe at the port. That's good, my old comrade. Here we can only trust that our experience and some manner of good fortune will keep us all safe on our journey. Good Bernard de la Roche, master of Toulon, no less. We are truly blessed that he and the surviving members of the council have managed to make their escape. A shout from below interrupted the preceptor. The wagons and horses are ready, my lord. He did not respond, but turned to his old companion. My thanks, Hugo. At Massy we will also see a number from Provence who will swell our meagre ranks. So in all we are close to 30, a poor morsel for the order, which saddens me greatly. The good news is that Du Chalon has been successful at Carcassonne and Radaille, and has secured as much as could be carried in the wagons. I understand that he has that which we must conceal at all costs, as well as the other artifacts and documents that we must get out of France. The old sergeant's face now turned sombre and concerned as he asked his master in earnest, Is it true that de Molay has made his... Yes, sadly, my friend, he has. His sacrifice will be long remembered. The Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay, had 15 days previously left a secret meeting with the High Council of the Order, ruminating gravely about the decision he had just made. He was convinced it was the right decision, but it pained him that it had come to this. For land and money, no more, no less. This was the reason the king and the pontiff had conspired to refill their coffers by terminating the most powerful medieval order overnight. Indeed, responded the now forlorn-looking retainer. They say the queen herself was the one who told him of the plans and the date. Such is his standing. So it was to pass a few hours later, as under the cover of darkness, de Villiers and his cohorts made their way west, into what they hoped would be a safe and secure future. The Grand Master de Molay allowed himself to be taken. The intention was to give the inner council a chance to escape unhindered. He is a brave and noble lord, who will, I fear, suffer greatly at the hands of these thieves and deceivers. De Villiers' words were prescient, as it would be on the 11th of March 1314, after 7 years of torture, that their erstwhile leader would be burned at the stake. They would receive the news some time later. De Villiers looked gravely at his companion. Come, Hugo, my old friend. We must get moving. I fear a night of horror awaits our other brothers. Perhaps, if we had known of the king's intentions earlier, we would have been in a stronger position and been able to do more to protect them. In Orsus, the next time we see these men, they will have travelled the long road from Paris via Orleans to Massy Abbey, and a confrontation that will be remembered for 4 distinct actions. From there, they will depart from Le Gabut in La Rochelle and take to the sea. An afterthought. There is something irresistible about the idea that our fear of Friday the 13th began on a Friday morning in medieval France. The date certainly deserves its sinister reputation in Templar history. As we have heard, on Friday the 13th of October 1307, officials acting for Philip IV moved against the Knights Templar throughout France and Europe, and the method is perhaps more extraordinary than the date. This wasn't a mob attacking the Templars. It wasn't a battle. It was purely administration. Instructions had been prepared in secrecy and distributed under seal to royal officials to be opened and acted upon at the appointed time. The accusations were devastating: heresy, idolatry, obscene initiation ceremonies, sodomy, the denial of Christ, and other offences sufficiently shocking to destroy the reputation of an organisation founded to defend Christian pilgrims. And behind them stood something considerably more mundane: power. Philip IV had been engaged in repeated struggles over money, taxation, and royal authority. The Templars possessed land, wealth, extensive financial networks, and privileges that placed them beyond ordinary royal control. Destroying them required no battlefield. It just required paperwork. And that is one of the reasons this episode belongs so naturally within Ursus. The machinery matters. Did the Templars create Friday the 13th? Here the story becomes much less satisfactory. Because it's a magnificent story, unfortunately, there is little evidence that that is true. Friday and the number 13 both had acquired unfortunate associations independently within European culture, but the familiar claim that Friday the 13th became unlucky because the Templars were arrested on the 13th of October 1307 was a much later connection. There is no convincing medieval trail showing people emerging from the destruction of the Templars and subsequently treating every Friday the 13th as cursed because of what Philip IV had done. So, the 13th of October 1307? Fact. A catastrophic Friday for the Knights Templar? Absolutely. The origin of the modern 13th superstition? Perhaps not. Which naturally has never prevented it from becoming one of the most persistent stories associated with the Templars. Fact and fiction. Fact. Philip IV ordered the arrest of the Knights Templars in France. The operation began on Friday the 13th of October 1307. The Grand Master Jacques de Molay was arrested. Guillaume de Nogaret was one of the principal architects of Philip's campaign against the order. The accusations against the Templar were extensive and deliberately inflammatory. The order possessed enormous property and financial wealth. And Jacques de Molay eventually died at the stake in Paris on the Îles de Geoff in March of 1314, during which the legend of the curse may well have been born. The famous curse tradition largely emerges from later chroniclers and retrospective narrative shaping. The essential version is, as he died, Molay summoned Pope Clement V and King Philip IV to appear before God's judgment within the year. Some versions also include Guillaume de Nogaret, Philip's chief minister and object of the prosecution. The exact wording varies considerably. The most famous later formulation: Pope Clement, King Philip, before 1 year I summon you to the tribunal of God. This is historically uncertain as verbatim speech, but the belief spread rapidly because the events afterwards were, well, quite extraordinary. Clement V died on the 20th of April 1314. Roughly a month later, the cause of death in historical terms was likely cancer or severe intestinal disease. Philip the Fair, or Philip IV, died at Fontainebleau on the 29th of November 1314 after an unexpected hunting accident and sudden illness in the forest of Halat. He was only 46 years old. De Nogaret himself had already died earlier in 1313, but later traditions folded him into the cursed narrative anyway. The legend deepened because Philip's dynastic line, the Capetians, then unravelled rapidly. His sons Louis X, Philip IV, and Charles IV also died without securing a male succession. By 1328, the direct Capetian line ended. the succession crisis contributed directly to the 100 Years' War, and to medieval observers, the pattern appeared supernatural. Fiction. Philip's grandfather was Louis Castile, who was King Louis IX. He is in Orsus one of Mangonel. The Equispellacci know him as Castile. King Louis IX of France is honoured in the House of Representatives as just a pious ruler, a French king to be canonised to the saint. He's less frequently remembered for leading failed crusades, expelling the Jews from France, ordering the burning of the Talmud, and dying of dysentery outside Tunis in 1270, having achieved nothing of military consequence on either campaign. He was canonised 27 years after his death. The Jews he expelled were not consulted. The Mangonel. The consistories in a circle, 4 immortals, each a reincarnation of a medieval figure of power, evil, avarice, and corruption. Elena de-Augustine and her manipulation of de Nogaret, her ancient search stretching from Jerusalem through Rome, Toulouse, and the land of the Cathars, is all part of Orsus. Gerald de Villiers and Hugo de Besancon's particular preparations for escape, as I have described them, are all part of Orsus, as is their secret cargo, and also the Equispellacci waiting behind the history we know. But that distinction gives us perhaps the most interesting question of all. Did some of the Templars actually escape? Almost certainly. Did some receive advance warning? Quite possibly. And did a carefully organised group remove the Order's greatest secrets and their treasure from France before Philip's men could seize them? That is where the historian has to stop. And that's where Orsus begins. I am Janos Di-Fanteria, and this is Orsus.